you come to sit in meditation, you start by bringing your awareness into your body. The body is always in the present moment. Take a deep breath. Feel the air, the sensations of the air in your nose, throat, lungs, and belly. Bringing awareness into your body. Feeling the position of your legs, back, head and neck and shoulders sitting upright, but also relaxed. Physically, we find this balance. We're upright with energy, but at the same time relaxed. Mentally, it's the same. Our mind is upright and energized, but at the same time relaxed. Breathing in, breathing out. Notice where you can detect the breath the most clearly. Is it the chest or your nose? Where do you feel the breath most clearly? How do you know if you're breathing in or if you're breathing out? We pay attention to the details of the sensation of the breath, but at the same time, keep your mind open, spacious, and relaxed. Thoughts may arise, but that's just mental energy. If you have thoughts coming and going, that's fine. Don't let that be a problem. But try to maintain at least half of your mindful awareness. Knowing if you're breathing in or if you're breathing out. at least half of your awareness with this physical body, grounded in the present. Even though thoughts may arise, thinking about the future or remembering the past, there's nothing that we have to figure out. When you sit down to meditate, you can just set down the burdens of responsibility temporarily. No problems you have to solve. Nothing you have to plan. Nothing to worry about.
Thank you, Ajahn, for the wonderful guided meditation. So we'll now formally request for Ajahn to give a Dhamma talk. So can I get all of you to be in your Anjali position again? I'll be reciting some verses, so you can just, keep your mind quiet and still and maintain the peacefulness from the meditation. Brahmajaloka Dipati Sahampati Katanjalihana Divarang Ayachata Sandita Sahatva Parajagadjatika Desetu Dhammam Anukampimat Vacham. The Brahma God, Sahampati, Lord of the world, with palms joined in reverence, requested a favor. Beings are here with but little dust in their eyes. Pray, teach the Dhamma out of compassion for them. We all bow 3 times.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasam. This evening we have a requested Dhamma topic for the talk. I believe it is emotional first aid. So if we need first aid, then we must be sick. If you need first aid, then you must be ill in some way. And in Dhamma practice, that is very true. You have to recognize that we're ill. Right? That is the first step. Without that, it's much more difficult to make progress. Now the Arhants, they're healthy. But if you're not an Arhat yet, and please excuse me if you are an Arhat. But if you're not an Arhat yet, then you're still ill to some degree. And there's no shame in admitting that. Even if we're very organized and we have our life together and we are able to manage our life well. Even if we're intelligent and competent, we're still ill. In the eyes of the Buddha, we're still mentally unbalanced. Right? What we have come to agree upon as the norm for sanity, in the eyes of the Buddha, this is still insane. You look around the way the world is. Of course, there's many things that we recognize are crazy or out of balance. People living, acting on their defilements, slaves to their defilements, acting out in their greed, acting out in their anger, controlled by their delusion. This is illness, this is mental illness. Yeah. So even if we are a normal, regular, sane, healthy person, it is an important first step just to at least theoretically recognize these defilements are still rooted in our hearts. They still have a hold in our hearts. Until we're able to somehow, some way, through the proper effort, proper practices, developing wisdom, eradicate them from our consciousness. Until then, we're not going to be fully healthy, emotionally healthy people. And then we need first aid. So what kind of aid do you want? There's a wide variety. People feel out of balance, sometimes anxious, overly worried, right? Depressed, right? So then what kind of emotional first aid can we find? You have to decide, first of all, do you want a band-aid just to cover up the wound? Or do you want to make sure the wound is completely healed and disappears? Right? How deep do you want the first aid to go? Do you want it to be superficial, or do you want it to be thorough and deep? Right? There are many, many avenues for superficial emotional first aid. Right? There's all sorts of, even just in the spiritual realm, there's all sorts of places that you can go and doing New Age retreats, right? And they serve a purpose. Right? It's still helpful, yeah? But it doesn't address the root of the illness. That's the problem. It's like you have a chronic illness. You can treat the symptoms, but if you don't eradicate the illness itself, then it's just going to keep coming back. And this is the way it is with defilements, right? We can manage our defilements. We can learn how to gradually be more patient. In the workplace, we learn not to get angry at the boss, right? And with our family members, we learn, when not to say things. We learn how to manage our defilements. We learn through experience what works and what doesn't, and that is a useful bandage. It's like if you have wounds, then even covering it up a little bit is going to be helpful. But the Buddha takes his process much more deeply. Right? If we really want to get to the root of emotional pain, whatever way you find that in your life, get to the root of emotional pain to make sure that it just doesn't come up anymore. It just doesn't happen anymore. Then a more thorough type of first aid, is required. Remember the very first meditation retreat I ever did. I hardly spent any time in the present moment. But it was an intensive retreat, and all of these memories came back, flooding back. I was I think 21 at that time, my early 20s. And so all of these memories came back, like 20 years worth of memories started coming back. And interestingly enough, it wasn't just some happy memories came up, but what stood out most was anything that had created some trauma. Either me experiencing trauma or feeling like I hurt somebody else's feelings. So this was the beginning of actually dealing with the karma that we're making, right? Now, if I hadn't done that retreat, I probably could have easily carried on for many more years and not really thought about all those memories, all those experiences, of those times where I had hurt somebody's feelings and I really shouldn't have said that, and I wish I'd handled that differently, right, when I was a teenager, and all the things that teenagers do. But being forced to sit there hour after hour, breathing, just being aware, watching my mind, all of this started to come back. So this is the beginning of dealing with emotional pain. You can have physical trauma, but then you have emotional trauma. And it doesn't have to be paralyzing emotional trauma, right? It doesn't have to be PTSD from a war zone, but just normal everyday life. Interactions with other people, the interactions and experiences we have with our family members and our parents, and all the complicated relationships sometimes that we have with our mother and father, or once you're a teenager or a young adult and you start getting involved in romance, and then all of the emotions that come up with that, and sometimes the joys and the heartbreaks that come with that, and there's just many opportunities there in normal daily life where either we experience disappointment or get our feelings hurt, or we recognize that maybe I hurt other people's feelings, or I could have been more skillful in my speech and my actions. So this is the beginning. It's an essential first step. At that point, I guess I didn't even really recognize, I didn't think of myself as emotionally traumatized in any way. I was just a rather enthusiastic young meditator coming to a meditation retreat thinking this was a really cool thing to do. But it was only once I began that I started to see more firsthand that just in ordinary daily life we do a lot of very crazy things. So this is the beginning of developing actual health, actual mental health. Meditation. Meditation, even if you feel like I can't meditate, my mind is too busy, I've got all these thoughts, I sit down, I'm just thinking about the future, worrying, right? Even if that's your experience of meditation, there's still a lot to be learned from that. It's like we stop, at least we stop and start to allow all the waves of our past actions to come and start washing over us. Just stop and see the memories, recognize the memories, see what's going on. That is already still very useful. So when people say to me, "Oh, I can't meditate," well, in what way can't you meditate? I mean, if you can sit still for a few minutes, have a few moments of mindful breathing, and even if the rest is simply watching your mind being out of control, that's still very useful. That's still a very important beginning. So once we start to recognize that, hey, we do have these wounds, right? How do you heal them? They say time heals all wounds. I don't believe that. Speaking with a friend recently, he was still upset about something that happened 35 years ago. as if it was only a month ago. He was like those. Time in and of itself will not heal wounds. People can hang on to resentment and bitterness until the day they die. It's only time combined with right effort. If we're gradually learning and developing wisdom as we grow older, yes, then all wounds can be healed for sure. But it takes a little effort. It's not simply passively just waiting, right? If I have emotional trauma and just think, well, if I just keep waiting, eventually it will all disappear. It doesn't on its own, right? It may get covered over. Sometimes it just gets covered over with other layers of new experiences. But if you really want to heal, not just have a band-aid, but if you really want to heal deeply, then we have to face the karma that we've made in the past. We have to examine the roots of our actions. What motivates us? Right? If we're motivated sometimes by selfish desire, what's the result? How do we feel? How does it affect other people? If sometimes we're motivated by anger, right? We get upset and we've got energy and we're motivated, we say things and do things. What's the result? How does it affect our minds? How does it affect our relationship with other people? If every day we're reflecting, watching, observing, investigating, right? If we're sincere in really trying to figure out this puzzle of life, then yeah, sure, then we can grow, and combination of time plus developing wisdom will definitely heal wounds. Forgiveness is a great healer of wounds. But it's important to clarify exactly what forgiveness is, because some people think, no, I could never forgive that person for what they did. But we're not forgiving the actions, the defiled actions of another person. But carrying around anger and resentment associated with the memory is a very heavy burden on our own heart. And if we want to be kind to ourselves, why would we do that? If we care about ourselves, why are we going to torture ourselves by carrying around anger and resentment and old memories? So out of kindness for ourselves, then we can let go. Out of respect for our own peace of mind, then we can learn how to let go. So in many ways, forgiveness has more to do with being kind to ourselves rather than directly affecting another person. Whoever we're angry at, or whatever they did, whether it was yesterday or last year or 20 years ago, they may not even be here anymore. They may not even be part of our lives. They may not even be alive. So when we're developing forgiveness, really we're working with a perception of another person. Many of the meditation practices that we train with in Buddhism actually are working with perceptions, our perception of reality. And to the greatest degree, our experience of reality is formed by our perceptions, which are then projected out. Now, these perceptions are actually malleable. If they're informed by delusion, then we perceive things in one particular way. If at a given time we are angry, then we perceive a situation in a particular way. Right? If our minds are clouded by delusion, or if we're intoxicated, then our perceptions, are affected by that, and our reality is experienced in a particular way. So purifying our perceptions, gradually informing our perceptions so that they become more and more in line with the way things truly are. Right? This is the essence of many of our Buddhist meditation trainings. So with forgiveness, for example, forgiveness is a great healer, is a great first aid for emotional healing. But it's still not easy sometimes. You're breathing, try to visualize somebody and say, I forgive you, I forgive you. And then our minds start to go into the story of what happened in the past. Sometimes say, no, I don't forgive you, I hope you. No, I'm not ready for that yet. So then we have to clearly look to see what's going on. Is that person here right now? No. It's just these thoughts, these memories, these perceptions, all within our mind. Now the great thing is, we have the ability to change that. We have everything we need right here and right now to modify our perceptions in accordance with the way things truly are. We don't have to make anybody else change their behavior in order for forgiveness to happen. If we had to have everyone else change their behavior according to what we would like them to, how we would like them to behave, that would be a lot of hard work, and it would be nearly impossible. Because there's no way you're going to get everyone to behave just the way we want them to behave, or never to be insensitive or unkind. Right? We're always going to be surrounded by some people who have very little Dhamma in their hearts. They speak roughly, they act immorally. Right? Well, there's always going to be some people who are just dominated by their defilements, and they don't realize it. They don't even think about it. They think it's great. Right? So there's no way that you can change other people's behavior to make them pure. So even if people like that affect us in a negative way, then how are we going to be free of that? We don't want to end up being a slave to someone else's defilements. We get enough of our own. So how can we be free of other people's, their speech and their actions? It's a well-known story when Sariputta was on alms round one morning with another young monk following. Sariputta was walking through the village, and on that particular occasion there was someone who very inappropriately was publicly criticizing Sariputta, just blasting him with criticism there, write an alms run in the village. Sariputta just carried on an alms run, calmly, composed. And when it was finished and they left the village, the young monk said, "How come he didn't say anything back? That was so untrue, that was so unfair, that was absolutely unjust. Why didn't you say anything?" And Sariputta said, "It's just sound. It's just sound. So ultimately, when other people criticize us, if we're truly free of that, it's just sound waves, isn't it? It's just like a breeze. It's just like a wind that comes. Sometimes you have a cool breeze, sometimes you have a hot breeze, right? Anger is a bit like a hot breeze, but it's just a breeze and it passes, right? It's only if something in our ego, sense of self, attaches to it, then that's where the problem starts. So ultimately, then we start to find, if we want to be absolutely emotionally healthy, we got to do something about this sense of self and identification and ego. If every time someone praises us, we get kind of puffed up, and every time someone criticizes us, we respond with resentment, then that's not a very free way to live. We're like slaves to other people's opinions and their approval. If other people approve, then we feel good. If other people disapprove or they don't give us their approval, then we feel terrible. So that's not a free way to live. How then can we be free? We can't force other people to always praise us. We can't force other people always to be kind and compassionate and thoughtful. So how, in the midst of living with other human beings, can we be free? Ultimately, it comes down to making sure there's nothing sticks. There's no place for things to stick. If we identify with certain things as being, this is who I am, and then someone criticizes that, then it hurts. If we're identified with being competent, right? For example, I'm a good student, I'm a good worker, I'm a good whatever. I'm good at my job. And then someone criticizes it. Right? It hurts because we are identified with that. Right? If we're identified with how we look, right? We think, oh, I'm so handsome. Oh, I'm so pretty. And then someone says, boy, you're pretty ugly. Right? And it hurts because we're identified with how we look. We're identified with this body. Once you start to look at the things we identify with, then that leads to everything. We're identified with almost everything in our experience. We're identified with our body, identified with our state of health. We can even identify with our diseases. We can identify with our mental issues. We can identify with our depression. We can identify with our anger, my anger. I have an anger problem, right? And the more we identify with these things, the more it actually compounds the problem. Identify with our opinions, and then someone has a different opinion and say, well, they must be wrong because it's a different opinion than mine. I see things clearly. How could that? I wouldn't intentionally have a wrong opinion, so they must be wrong. So then you can see the roots of how emotional pain perpetuates itself. If we are attached to our opinions and our views and our beliefs, and then other people have different opinions and views and beliefs, and they say ours are wrong, then that can create conflict, disagreements, yelling, it can create fighting, it can lead to violence. Talk about emotional healing. So I live in New Zealand. New Zealand is a country famous for beautiful nature, being a very peaceful place, very laid back and relaxed. And very recently then we had this terrorist attack in Christchurch. And it shook the whole country. It made news all over the world, but particularly in New Zealand because it was a bit naively innocent. It's a bit like, when we're young and we haven't ever had our heart broken yet. Yeah? Or we haven't really experienced any difficulty in life yet. Right? And then suddenly it happens. Right? So initially for a lot of the people living in the country, it was traumatic. We talk about emotional trauma. A lot of the people that I know who weren't, these are not people who were directly affected. These were not people who were living in Christchurch. But just being in the same country where something like that happened, it challenged their perception of their country. It challenged their perception of who they thought they were as a people. And so that is the essence of trauma. You cannot even identify with good things. You can identify with being a peaceful country. And that's fine as long as it's not challenged. But then as soon as it's challenged, I saw how quickly it led to people becoming anxious and depressed, sometimes angry. So you don't have to wait until something terrible happens in order to recognize the good things in your life. Sometimes that is the silver lining of when something painful happens, is that you recognize, all these years prior to that, I had been taking these good things for granted. The peace, or the good people in our lives. Sometimes we're surrounded by good people and we're very fortunate, and after a while you start to take it for granted. And then maybe suddenly a family member dies, and then it suddenly brings it home how fortunate we were before that. And it can help us to appreciate those people around us even more. So sometimes a tragedy can have that positive effect, but you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for something bad to happen in order to appreciate the people around us. Appreciate the good things we have. And you don't have to wait for something to cause trauma in order to start undermining the causes of trauma, to make sure that even if something does happen, that we have some preparation for that. Why is it the Buddha emphasized so much that we should contemplate our own death and become at peace with dying? As monks, we're supposed to contemplate that every day, regularly. The days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? Life flows by so quickly. If we could all be guaranteed of 80, 85 years, 90 years, that would be one thing. It would still pass quickly, and we could waste a lot of time by taking it for granted. But the situation is much more unstable than that. Just very recently, my cousin's husband, he was very healthy. Every day would exercise, and he was maybe a couple of years older than I was. He was out bicycling one morning. It's just last month. Had I think maybe a brain aneurysm, went unconscious while he was riding his bicycle, crashed his bicycle, and then died shortly after in the hospital. Absolutely, completely unexpected. Family, children, it's like healthy, right? No warning. Wow, this is reality. This happens. You can't even say that it's good or it's bad. It's just, this happens. This is part of life. This is part of dukkha. If we're not prepared for that, it can be devastating. It can lead to incredible pain, trauma. Sometimes people lose loved ones and they never heal. They have that wound, that emotional wound, until the day they die. They never really heal. But it doesn't have to be that way. And if we know that this is the nature of life, why not try to prepare for it? The very simple exercise of contemplation of impermanence is very effective for undermining things that can lead to emotional pain. Just recognizing that everything we have, everything that we love, everything that's going very well, this will come to an end. And when it does, then we can either suffer because we're attached to it and identified with it, or we can simply accept it as the next thing that's happened. Something comes to an end, say, oh, okay, that's done now. But then the next moment begins. So contemplation of impermanence is 2,600 years, is still not gone out of fashion. Still useful in everyday life. You don't have to be a monk, you don't have to be a nun, you don't even have to do meditation retreats. It's good if you have a daily meditation practice. But just in daily life, in every situation that you find yourself in, just remember, well, this won't last. Right? Sometimes it's good when things are unpleasant. You can say, well, this won't last. Something's not going our way, we're not happy, we're not getting what we want. Say, well, this too is impermanent. So that helps to undermine the movement towards pain or holding on to pain. And we get pain, we get upset, whatnot, right? Why do we get upset? Because we want things to be different, or we want things not to change, or we want things to change but they're not changing. Or at least not changing in the way that we want them to change. So challenge everything that you're identified with. If you want to truly get to the root of healing emotions, healing your consciousness, healing your mind, then you can look beyond a mere band-aid. Right? Meditation is, yes, it's there for stress reduction, that's fine, but it's much, much more than that. It's not just a band-aid, it's very deep healing. So when you get to the heart of seeing what we identify with and recognizing that everything we identify with will change, and that's neither good nor bad, it's just a fact, then that in and of itself is conducive for developing wisdom and will do a lot in order to maintain an inner peace and stability and acceptance of whatever happens in the future. In this way we can not only heal the past, heal the wounds of the past, but we can prevent any further wounds from happening. Out of kindness for yourself, kindness for everyone around, then I offer this for your reflection.
Thank you, Ajahn, for the beautiful sharing. So I have with me 3 questions, and they all seem to revolve around karma. So the first question is, had a miscarriage. I was told that my baby died weak. I am still emotionally broken and suffering a lot. Can you please help me understand what happens to my unborn child's soul? Why do you think, there's a few missing words here, so I'll try to just read accordingly. Why do you think allowed this to happen to me? How can I overcome this terrible episode and carry on with my life?
Yeah, speaking of pain and loss, although I've never been a parent in this lifetime, it seems that a parent losing a child is one of the most painful things that a person can experience. Questions of why, come up. Why? Is there anything we could have done differently? Is it somehow my fault? Why has this happened? Is it, right? If people are theists, right? Christian, Muslims, whatever, then they can have their own theories of why that happens, or sometimes it shakes people's faith. The way the Buddha looked at it was, things happen perfectly according to the law of karma. There's no guarantee of how long we're going to live. And there's no guarantee that we're actually even going to be born. Right? I mean, once conception happens, there's no guarantee that we're actually going to live long enough to come into this world. Sometimes it is a result of past karma of that particular being. Right? Sometimes that is the case. Sometimes it's other factors not everything that we experience is a result of our past karma. The majority is, great majority is. But there are other factors as well that come into play. So if you're looking for why, questions of why does this happen, it's difficult to find an answer because the workings of karma are so complicated and intertwined. It's very difficult to see all of the causes and conditions that lead up to certain actions and certain results. But what we can do is to learn how to accept this has happened. Now what? I could suffer for the rest of my life, or I could learn how to go beyond suffering. Sometimes we confuse suffering with caring. Like if a woman has a miscarriage or if a parent loses a child, it almost seems like we shouldn't be happy because it's like that would be like we didn't care, right? And we have to maintain a certain depression to show that we cared and loved for the person or child who passed away. But that's tragic. You can absolutely care and love for someone who's died and then still be happy after that. It's a challenge, but it is necessary. Otherwise, for us to be happy, everything just has to go really smoothly in life all the time. But when painful things happen, then we have to learn, how can I be happy even after this? And as I say, I mean, a parent losing a child is one of the extremes of suffering in the human realm. But if that child had been born and grown up a bit, would they have wanted you to suffer and be unhappy for the rest of your life? No. It's like when loved ones die. You know, it's natural to go through a period of grieving and loss and adjustment. But you think, well, that the person who we loved, would they have wanted us to be unhappy for the rest of our lives? No. No, of course not. So then we just have to learn how to say, well, this happened, but then let go. Again, it comes back down to identification. Ultimately, what is it that we're attached to? Even if you give birth to a child, is it really your child? There is this body, there is this mind, there's, there are the causes and conditions that give rise to pregnancy and birth and then new beings growing up with a body and mind, but ultimately there's no one there. These are just mental and physical elements interacting, causes and conditions flowing on. It's only a delusion that says, this is my child. Even love, is still can be based on delusion. I love my child, I love my partner, I love my husband, my wife, I love my parents, Right? There's still that delusion of me and mine. This is mine. And I love it because it's mine. Right? Grandchildren. Oh, I love my grandchildren. Well, what about other people's grandchildren? They're okay. But they're not my grandchildren. I love my grandchildren even more. So why? Because they're mine. So there is that, in normal society, that level of delusion is not considered negative. That's considered normal, positive expression of love. But it's still based on delusion, isn't it? Right? Me and mine, my baby. I lost my baby. Ultimately, there is no one there. Right? Now that's a high bar of insight to work with, right? But even in small ways, if we can incline ourselves to start thinking about, is this cup truly mine? They put it here for me, so maybe for 1 hour it's my cup. But even that's delusion, isn't it? So start with the small things. It's hard to let go of the most painful things if that's the thing that you start with. But if you can start with the small identifications, right? It's like, okay, this is my cup. It's my cup. But actually it's not really mine, so actually when I leave here tonight, I won't miss it. Right? And but then gradually work through the bigger and bigger things that we identify in our life with me and mine, and then we gather some strength and some insight gradually, and then when something big happens, a big loss, a big, something that we really identify with is mine, and we lose that, then at least we're not, we have some experience. And it will be more challenging, but it's like we're not starting from nothing. We have some strength already, some strength of wisdom, and then we can rise up to even a greater challenge. Right? We're talking about forgiveness, it's like that. If you're developing forgiveness, don't start with the most difficult person in your life. Start with some easy people that you already love, but maybe they weren't as nice to you today as they normally are. All right? You think, oh, okay, I can forgive them for that. Or it's like your husband brought you flowers, but it wasn't the type of flowers that you wanted. You say, oh, wow, okay, I can forgive him for that. So start with the small things, and then you build up momentum. You build up strength, it becomes a positive habit, and then you gradually work your way up to the things which are more painful, more difficult to let go of. The person who you feel has really ruined your life. And then, and then by that point, you have enough strength of mind to maybe see that, well, even this action, this memory, it's not really my memory. It's just an imprint on this consciousness. Right? That event is gone. It's just poof, it's gone. What am I holding on to? So we, in small ways we can all learn to start practicing in that direction, and that will help a lot.
Thank you, Ajahn. This next question: had abortions could not stop thinking that I had killed unborn babies, how do I remove bad karma, and in what way to repay for what had happened?
Yeah, life is filled with dilemmas sometimes, which means that there are just bad options. Right? Certain situations, there seem like there's no good options, just bad options, and then you just have to try to choose which is the least bad of the bad options. If a woman has an abortion, or if a couple, makes a decision to have an abortion, and both partners take responsibility for it, then one, you have to take responsibility, right? If people think it's just, oh, it's nothing, right? And they don't really take responsibility, then that will tend to come back. The emotional or the karma of that will tend to come back later. So it's important to fully take responsibility. It's also important to be able to forgive yourself. Sometimes we are forced into difficult situations where we're forced to do things that we don't really want to do. I would say no one forces somebody to have an abortion, but people can sometimes feel that they're forced into a situation and that they have no other real choice, or the other options are even worse. So they can feel forced into a situation. So it's important to be kind to yourself in situations like that, and understand that your purpose is not to try to create harm in the world. You're not acting out of malice. You're not intentionally trying to be violent in the world. And recognize that guilt is not a helpful healing emotion. Guilt is just based on kind of a self-hatred. There's a certain remorse that comes from, sometimes we break precepts, or we make a mistake, or we may hurt somebody's feelings, right? And there's a certain remorse that comes from that. That's natural, but guilt is not healthy. And so beating ourselves up over and over and over again, at least recognize that that's not going to help, right? I was raised in a Christian society, so there's a certain kind of delusion that feeling guilty is the way to punish yourself, to get over your sins, right? It's like, we do something wrong, okay, I'll make myself feel guilty in order that it's like a self-punishment to balance out the wrongs that we've done. But actually it just makes things worse, right? So recognize, if you're feeling guilty sometimes, accept it, acknowledge it, but don't feed it. Don't think that it's something holy. Right? And then there are practices that you can do for an unborn child, right? In the same way, when someone older dies, when an unborn baby dies, you can still make offerings. You go to a monastery, you make offerings and say, well, may all the good karma that comes from this go to my unborn baby, right? Or you can just develop loving kindness, right? Just that consciousness that was there, you will carry on in some way, in some form, be born somewhere else, and then you just keep wishing, that consciousness, that little being, whatever the next phase was in their series of births, then may they be happy, may they find peace, may they be born into a good, healthy situation. So these practices also make the mother feel healed a bit. Talk about emotional trauma. If you've gone through an abortion and had to go through the difficult decision that comes with that, or sometimes a judgment from other people associated with that, and having to deal with other people's opinions. Can be a lot to deal with, can be very traumatic. And it's difficult to see everything as anatta and non-self, and just elements coming and going at that point. So start with something simpler, just unconditional loving kindness for yourself, and unconditional loving kindness for the unborn child. And so whatever has happened, right? Whatever you've done, even if you probably didn't have bad intentions, but even if you did, the thing about loving kindness is that we develop it to the point of unconditionality. So no matter what, you can have metta for yourself. Right? And just keep practicing that over and over and over again. Right? And that in itself would be very purifying. If you do that, plus time, then wounds have an opportunity to heal.
Thank you. We have one last written question before we open up for everyone to ask any questions. So the last question is, when an accident happens, is it considered bad karma, and is that considered paying or removing the karma?
When an accident happens or something unfortunate happens, then it might be a result of previous karma that we made coming to fruit. Yes, it is possible. But let's say you have a bus crash and 40 people die in the bus crash. Not every person in that bus crash may have created the karma to die in a bus crash. There are other factors involved as well. Now ultimately you can say, well, we've created the karma to be born, so then everything that happens to us is a result of our karma. It's true. But it's very difficult to know for sure. Say if an accident happens to us, does this mean we're burning off old karma? It's because the workings of karma are so complex. It's difficult, maybe sometimes impossible to know. Sometimes you can see the obvious connections, but often the connections are not easy to see. But it is a good reflection. It can help us have a positive attitude. It can help to put a positive spin on a difficult situation. It's like when you've got a project going and you're experiencing many obstacles for some reason. It's just obstacle after obstacle. You think, oh, well, we're making even more good karma, this is even better. We're developing even more paramis and spiritual qualities, overcoming all of these obstacles and all this old karma coming to fruit, and we're done with it. Right? It's like having a positive attitude, which can be very helpful. And sometimes it's very true. Right? Often when we have intention to do good things, many obstacles start to arise. And you have to be willing to rise up to that, and it is an opportunity for developing inner strength and peace and forgiveness and patience. Right? All of these very wholesome qualities.
Thank you. Does anyone have any question?
how to forgive ourselves if we promise to keep 5 precepts, but we broken again, and then we give our metta, then broken again, promise again, broken again. It's like the metta is like when you forget, and then how to, I don't know how to say. It's like we promise not to lie, but it's broken and.
Yeah, there are. I mean, with the precepts, keeping the precepts, we can make a determination and do our best to live by them. If sometimes we make mistakes, okay, we forgive ourselves. Try to understand the situation. How did that happen? Is there a way in the future that I could not fall into that same problem? Right? So let's see if we can learn something from it. Right? So let's say we end up lying for some reason, right? And it's okay, it doesn't feel good to lie, and I had made a determination not to lie. How did that situation happen, right? Was it the people that I was with, or the situation, or was I trying to protect my reputation, or what was it? What was it exactly? And in the future, if that same situation happened again, is there a way that I could approach it without lying? Keeping silence. Or being brave enough to tell the truth. Or seeing the situation coming early enough that you don't get yourself into a difficult situation. So you then learn something from it. And then you take something that's negative, but then you learn something, you grow, and you develop wisdom, and you say, okay, well, next time that happens, you imagine, let's say, maybe I could do this, or say this, right? And then that way, we gain positive experience, and get better. Now, if it's the case that you say, take the 5 precepts, and then next week you break the 5 precepts, and you take the 5 precepts, and the next week you break the 5 precepts, then you take the 5 precepts, and the next week you break the 5 precepts, and you think, I need more discipline. How am I going to discipline myself? I just can't stop myself. Right? What are you going to do? Okay, then maybe you can say, okay, if I break the 5 precepts again, then I'm going to take away something that I really like to do. Right? Sort of a punishment and reward, right? Right? So like if you keep the 5 precepts, you give yourself a bit of a reward. Right? If you break the 5 precepts, then you don't give yourself a reward, or maybe you not punish yourself in a cruel way, but just say, okay, well, I'm not gonna allow myself, something that I like to do. And that does have an effect. I remember, when I was a novice at Wat Pah Nanachat, the wake-up bell goes at 3 o'clock in the morning. That used to be the time where I was go to bed on a Saturday night. Now the wake-up bell goes at 3 in the morning, and I have to get up, be at chanting by 3:30. And one morning, I was pretty diligent, right? But then one morning, I heard the wake-up bell, and I thought, oh, just another 5 minutes. There's enough time just to roll over. Just another 5 minutes, I'll get up. And then before I knew it, it was like 4:30. Right. It's like, oh no, it was so embarrassing to go in late. So I went in late, and it's a little embarrassing. But at that point, I made a determination. It's like, okay, I need to learn how to really be disciplined. And not just discipline like sort of discipline, but like 100%. How am I going to do that? at that point in my life, I was really skinny, and I hated fasting, and I was always hungry because we only had one meal a day, and it's only 20 minutes long, and I was, just sort of skinny anyways. I didn't have any fat reserves, so I hated fasting. So I said, if I ever miss morning chanting again, I'm going to fast on that day. Right? I said, okay, I made that determination. So then I did pretty well after a while, but then again one morning, I just, again, overslept. It's usually like, you hear the bell, okay, time to, just 5 minutes. Just 5 more. But there's no snooze alarm on the bell, right? It's not like it rings again after 5 minutes. It's just like, and then you this. We sleep on the floor, but if you're tired, even sleeping on a wooden floor feels comfortable. And you go, this nice wooden floor on my face feels so nice. And you go, just another 5 minutes. And then boom, oh no, I missed it again. And even worse this time, now I have to fast. Right? It's like, okay, all right, I said I was going to do it, so I'm going to do it. And so, like, for the next 24 hours, I was hungry. I was just hungry. But I had a lot of time to meditate. The whole morning I could just keep on meditating, and I let the other monks know that I was fasting, and so I was just, meditating and getting skinnier and skinnier. And then the next morning, when that wake-up bell went at 3 o'clock, it was like, ding, ding, ding. I was like, boom! I was popped right up. Popped right up. It was ready. No way I'm going to fast 2 days in a row. Absolutely no way. So it's like, boom! I heard that bell. I was like, oh, I'm ready. Let's go. Boom. And from that point on, I think I hardly ever missed a morning meditation. I mean, I was like, I don't know if I ever missed another one after that. So that's something that you can do. It's not like you're punishing yourself to be unkind to yourself, but you can. It does actually work, having some rewards and a little punishment there, or forcing yourself to do something that. You can force yourself to do something wholesome, right? You say, if I break the 5 precepts again, I'm going to do a meditation retreat. Or if I break the 5 precepts again, then I have to meditate 3 hours that day. Right? You say, okay, well, it's a good thing. Right? So at least, but you force yourself to do something that's difficult, but is still good. And that way it can condition us. It's a form of training and conditioning and developing good habits and developing discipline. So you use a combination of things. You try to learn and use wisdom and understanding, but sometimes you just have to say, nah, I'm going to punish myself if I don't do it right.
Thank you, Ajahn. Any more questions? Maybe I'll ask. There's a few verses that says, I'm the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, and related to my karma, etc. Sometimes it's easy to take too much ownership of those verses and feel a sense of guilt and self-blame. So how does one strike a balance?
Yeah, those verses from the loving kindness reflections and Brahma Viharas, they approach beings as conventional beings, right? They're not approaching it from the viewpoint of anatta. Like, may all beings be happy, may I be happy, I am the owner of my karma. Conventionally, that is true. It's important to see the cause and effect relationship. But ultimately, you even have to go beyond that and just say there is karma happening. There are causes and there are results, and it is flowing along. But even if I identify with actions and identify with results, that's going to lead to suffering. And so applying anatta to the law of karma as well just takes your ego out of it, takes yourself out of it. Right? It helps to be a bit more dispassionate that way, right? Rather than seeing it as so personal. It's like, I've done something and now I'm receiving the result, right? It can feel so personal. So just try to see it more realistically, which is, there are causes. Some causes lead to happiness and benefit. Some causes lead to unhappiness or suffering. Yeah. If you see that, our minds will naturally incline towards creating the causes that lead to happiness. Ultimately, that's just what you have to do. Right? Seeing things more clearly, our minds will naturally incline towards happiness. Right? Not simply the actions themselves, but our reaction to the actions, our emotional reaction to the action, our attachment to our actions. Right? When we begin to see that even our emotional reactions, that's simply another phenomena that's happening without a self behind it. So then it becomes a little easier to step back and just see this as a process that's playing out, and that automatically creates more sense of peace in your own mind, right? And stability, and ultimately, being able to let go of things that happened in the past.
Any more questions? Okay. If there are no more questions, shall we say sadhu 3 times to Ajahn? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I have one small request, because I think today we have quite a few personal questions relating to karma. I was wondering whether Ajahn could do a form of blessing to bless those beings, all sentient beings, seen or unseen, especially those who were mentioned in the questions, or any departed relatives and friends.
So what you can do, anytime that a Buddhist monk is giving a blessing, you can amplify it by visualizing in your heart maybe someone who's passed away, or even yourself, but just allowing to take this in. Not just going through the motions as if it was just a ritual that we go through. So I offer this for your blessing, peace of mind. Yata varivaha bhuram varim varandi sagarang evam eva ito adinam vedanam upakapati ecetang pacetang tumhang kipameva samijatu sambem burendu sangapa chandho panarasu yata manijo iraso yata sabityo vivajantu Samarongo vinasatu Mande mavandwandarayo Sukhininga yugo bhava Ambivandana sinisani changudapachayino Jataro dhamma vadamde Ayukwano sukhang Balam.
you. Shall we or pay respects to Ajahn before we do the closing homage? So let us bow 3 times. Thank you, Ajahn.
It's a pleasure to be back in Singapore. I just arrived and I'll be here until Monday, so hopefully you'll have an opportunity to speak with you or see you as many times as you wish to participate over the next few days.
Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.